Hey there, wonderfuls. Sook-Yin wrapping up Virtual Venus Fest. It's been great talking with the guests and hearing about their strategies in navigating this challenging time. I want to share some of my own thoughts on inclusivity and alternatives. But before that, let me introduce you to the founder and artistic director of Venus Fest, Aerin Fogel. Now, Aerin is a Toronto-born and raised musician. She started to go to DIY shows when she was a teenager. She's also a healing arts practitioner who specializes in astrology, karmic patterns, and tarot card readings. In 2017, she started Venus Fest for positive and proactive change in the music industry. She plays with the band Queen of Swords, who are set to release a new album. Boop! Hi, Aerin.
Hi,
Fancy
Sook-Yin.
meeting you here.
Fancy seeing you on this virtual reality here.
Well, congratulations on putting it together, curating, and making this turkey fly. It's a phenomenal feat, and it's a lot of great content here. I'm wondering, what are the qualities that allowed you to make this happen?
I think when I think back to launching Venus Fest, in a way, it was kind of like a cart before the horse type experience. I had an inspiration to do this really from a place of need and the growing level of conversation that was happening, at least more publicly within the music industry, about our need for different levels of access and representation. So having been in the music community for a very long time, I've gotten to be part of a lot of those amazing conversations. And I have so many incredible colleagues here who all felt more than ready for something to shift. So from that place came Venus Fest, and from a desire to really see things starting to move forward in a clear and more obvious way.
And I mean, we've been talking about new methodologies, doing stuff. I mean, what does it take? What does it take to put something like this on?
Again, cart before the horse. I think in some ways it takes not knowing how much it's going to take, because I might not have done it if I really knew the commitment level, the hours per week. Like it's a very intense undertaking. But I also think that that's something that doesn't feel burdensome to people who have a desire or who have a passion for something. And I see a lot of my colleagues doing really incredible community work with the same kind of drive and motivation, because it comes from that place of passion and care for others. So I think that there's that kind of level of energy requirement, but there's also the sense that it requires a whole community and it requires people to be on board with it. So yes, I might have been the founder, but Venus Fest is very much a collective vision and a collective production, and something that really only functions because there are people who are in the space with us, whether that's like physically or virtually this year.
Well done. So good. The idea of the future of music, you brought about two pillars, specific pillars that you wanted to introduce, and that was the idea of inclusion. What does that mean? Where is that going? How is it working? And also figuring out new ways of sharing and disseminating music as we move from the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess that's something that I'm really curious to hear your perspective on as well, Sook-Yin, because obviously you have so many facets to your creativity and your expression of art, but you are a musician as well. And I think you know this world very intimately. So I'm curious to hear from your perspective what the future of music looks like. What are we doing here? What are we talking about here? And whether we've actually made any kind of progress in this more recent push for inclusivity that's been happening.
Yeah, I mean, so I think back on very early days of growing up in Vancouver, and I came from a very vital community where musicians and poets and dancers and visual artists, we all cross-pollinated. It would be very common for me to show up at a poetry reading with old timers and be able to do really experimental work, and then as a non-dancer, dance and sing with operatic singers, like in very unusual and innovative, ingenious places. There were no nightclubs back then, so we would, there were a lot of warehouse parties. There were a lot of renting of the Ukrainian hall, strange, corners that we could put on shows. And so that's really where I come from. And I feel that more and more with so many possibilities of communication, that those opportunities, that spirit lends itself well to this time and place. And so that idea of inclusion is kind of like the possibility of making your own fun, making your own situation, building it, and they will come. It's a cliche, but I do think it's true. At the same time, I am highly aware because I've worked within institutional frameworks. There are gatekeepers in established places that can make opportunities happen or deny people. And those are, when we talk about the larger industry infrastructure, those are people that, have the big government subsidies, Canadian taxpayers paying for their places, corporations, and those places, power does not the executive class do not give up their power readily. They hang on to the power, and right now there's a demand for inclusion. There's an understanding, especially with the pandemic, of the racial and economic inequalities, and people want to see beyond just white upper middle class stuff. Also the populace isn't just that anymore. So it kind of we've heard such a demand for equality, human rights, and that of course spills into the entertainment industry, which is extremely xenophobic, extremely tight. And I don't see that changing. Honestly, I don't see that changing for a long time. I know that within these structures there are pushes to reform and change. And that's going to happen slowly. And it won't happen in a meaningful way until people are willing to give up their power. People don't usually do that. They want to retire comfortably. And so even with these kinds of initiatives for diversity, if you look beyond that, it's usually the same small group of people who have held power. They're still continuing to hold power, that are making those little boxes. And in some ways you can say it kind of covers their butts and makes them look kind of inclusive. So I don't think we should necessarily wait for that to change. We can't really do that. The good thing is that specifically music, I see as being a place of great enterprise. Musicians aren't the ones who are waiting necessarily for the subsidy. They usually put on a show, charge a cover, take the money, and divide it. It's really simple. We make stuff happen. Same with artists, tradesies, whatever. So this is a wonderful way that we have already established our beings. And so I think we have to continue that kind of do-it-yourself quality, that to be able to make those opportunities happen for ourselves, to try to make some money, and put good work out there, create community, and share. That's the upside to that. I mean, I feel like it is going to be a difficult time. At the same time as there's been so many possibilities of multiplicity and do-it-yourself action, the gatekeepers still hold a lot of power. And they're feeling the crunch too. They're feeling the crunch. They have fears, and when they feel the crunch and they have fears, and they're in the business of making money and not losing money, they have a tendency to be a bit more fearful, and therefore want to be more proprietary. I'm seeing this in movies, places that were a little bit more open to collaborations, or a bit more like, no, we want all the rights.
Yeah.
And for this very small sum, no negotiation, you know, and we need those places. And so even like the paltry sum of no negotiation, it's like, as an artist, you're like, okay, but how do we then, you know, manage that, and how do we speak to those structures? And then also, well, you know, there are options of disseminating things online, like through Bandcamp, through iTunes. So we have to constantly be seeing what are the options out there. So it's there are amazing things happening, incredible things happening, because I do think that just the sheer fact that we can be talking here, and that you can directly create this amazing festival, curate it very well. Like, I'm looking at you and your team, and I'm thinking, there are large corporations struggling to do what you're doing, not knowing how, having way more money, not putting out an aesthetically interesting program. I mean, because, you know, really, who's going to tune into something that's boring, like, or has no additional quality? And there you are doing it. A person who didn't know what they were doing at first, but just threw themselves into, like, I'm going to make this thing. And this is a wonderful example of how things can work. Well, but I say, don't wait for the big structures to necessarily change, but keep applying pressure.
Well, I think it's like you said, there's kind of two levels to how this works. And there's the level of community, where people have always worked from a sense of connection and supporting one another, and have often been the people who are sort of pushing from the margins for change. And maybe over decades and decades, that push for change kind of starts to trickle down into the larger structures. But then there is the larger structure that tends to be more power oriented. And those are people who are not interested in giving up power, who are often motivated from a kind of survival fear that there isn't enough. And so they're hanging on to...
Less likely to share, and also conservative. Right now, the movie industry is in a kerfuffle because pandemic, there are a lot of productions are not getting their insurance, which is putting everything in a holding pattern. So they're kind of like, it can be, it's going to be harder. It is harder in a lot of ways. But as I said, you know, things like art and art making and music, I mean, it's so accessible given the technologies at our disposal. The last 3 albums I've recorded and produced right here on this computer that I'm speaking to you through basic consumer software, and it sounds great. That said, I have this album on that needs a home, and I reached out to a couple places. 2 labels were like, yes, we want to put it out. And then the pandemic hit, and they're like, we can't.
Right.
We can't do it. You know, so I'm trying to figure out, okay, what is a new way that I can also seek out the opportunities that perhaps there is a label there that can, that I can do business with. But I look back and I'm like, holy smokes, you know, I come from a place where back in the day, people would only record in the studios. And that was before all the lo-fi movement and stuff. And that was really cost prohibitive. So now we can do things really, really cheap, which is more in keeping with the spirit of that whole sort of 2000s lo-fi movement. And also, I mean, in lockdown and during the pandemic, I decided to make a feature movie, and completely broke all the rules, all of the rules. They're basically produced, acted, edited, co-directed, we shot it. It's like my friend Dylan and I, we shot the whole thing. We act in the whole thing, and I cut it on iMovie.
I love that.
So it's kind of like things can happen, and it really helped to articulate the time too, because it's been such a strange time that giving focus to the work was amazing. An amazing thing. And also it sort of brought me back to this idea of auteurship, of like, of really realizing that you can imagine something and then go and create it without a lot of people chiming in about what they want changed, because this could be offensive or fill in the blank of whatever concerns there may be. So it's like, now I have this thing, and so how do I, introduce it to the world? But it is exciting to see the possibilities, that the tools are at our disposal. We have technology, and how to monetize that, how to make it make sense. That's something that we'll all have to sort of slowly unpack.
Right. So, I mean, thinking about the pandemic and in context of the future of music and this theme that we ironically came up with last year after our last September festival, and our team was thinking about the future of music then. Now we're really thinking about it and sort of how things are going to change in terms of how music is created and how it's shared and how it's enjoyed by people in different spaces. And what do you think about that? I mean, you're talking about accessing tools that are already there and being resilient and being resourceful with what we have. But yeah, how do you see that affecting the way that music happens for us?
Yeah, so I think that I mean, it's been interesting speaking with the artists too. What works, what doesn't work. I feel that there has to be an extra added bonus in terms of something production value, in terms of something interesting when you're offering something online. So, for example, here at Venus Fest, you've got these creative collaborations that are visually stunning, as well as great musicians. So there's really something very beautiful to take in there. And then on the other side, what works for me is just somebody who watches stuff is when it's very, very intimate. When it feels really, really from somebody's heart to you, I'm much more compelled to watch. What doesn't work is that in-between thing where it's not that interesting to watch and somebody's playing to a big, big audience and it kind of feels like a live show recording. And it doesn't quite connect. I think maybe there's something around that, like really intimate expression, soul to soul expression, or I also love the NPR in the library mixtape broadcast where they really go put something they turn this kind of ugly library with a few gels and stuff. They make it really, really beautiful. I saw Tyler, the Creator's jazz set on that. And I was like, wow. That's cool. Love it. So I think considerations like that, I get frustrated with the idea of Spotify, not paying musicians, or something like if you have 1 million spins, they'll send you 75 cents. Like, thank you.
Maybe that, yeah.
I mean, Bandcamp sounds like a bit more of a possibility of going concern, because people, they say, you can give whatever you want. And so people tend to be generous when they do have money. And so that can be a little bit more of an advantage there. And then talking with, people like Ansley Simpson, who along with Iskway and Jeremy Dritcher, they're just kind of like creating their own websites and sort of getting rid of the middleman. I mean, I think there's something interesting there. Everybody's doing online banking, so maybe there's something where you send them an amount for a download or something. I myself am a little bit of a Luddite, so I really don't know these things, but I am a good communicator. So I just think it's a matter of how sort of, I guess, researching all of that stuff. I do think that there are many challenges posed right now. I mean, we are having to rethink our methodologies. I was like, oh, this is my first time to be part of something like this. And I was like, my home's very messy. So what do I do? So I just like stuck this thing.
I love it. Yeah.
But, I mean, right now I have like gels in front of my kitchen window to change light. And certainly making the movie in the confines of my 11-foot wide row house, it really became a studio in here. So I see that a lot of artists are really jerry-rigging their houses to turn them into sort of multi-use spaces, which I think is probably important. And again, I think I think times of tumultuous times, like I have been acutely aware for the last few years that we're moving into a very intense period of history where technology is collapsing with pre-existing systems that are breaking down. And in a lot of ways, I'm like, this is as explosive as 1968 was, when there was so much going on, and as a result, incredible art.
Yeah.
And so this is a real important time to be expressing oneself. And I think that, many of the artists I talked to touched upon the idea of self-care. And, in amongst all of this stuff, like, believe me, I am a hustler I've never been handed an opportunity on a silver platter, but I have worked to hustle my opportunities and will continue to do so. But that can be exhausting after a while. And I think this idea of self-care is super abundantly important. And I think as an artist, questioning yourself, what is it that you want to express and why? Right now, so many people are going, holy shit, I don't need the agent. I don't need this. What was I doing? Wasting my time on this. Time is of the essence, and we only live so long. So you might as well, if you're going to contribute something, care about it, you know.
Yeah.
And then also, you know, I've been thinking personally, I with so much time to reflect in all the ways that society is broken, how I am broken. So, you know, ideas of, it occurs to me that I would like to, you know, promote more patience, generosity, you know, acceptance, self-acceptance, fun, spaciousness in my life, I think is so important. And so being, you know, as we are, it's so easy to see where things are going wrong out there. I think to put the reflection back upon ourselves to see what can work a little bit better in here as well, I think is really important. And that will trickle down into what it is that we express to others.
Absolutely.
In this arena, I mean, I found it very interesting thinking about all of the, there's a lot of constraints put onto live music venues right now with the pandemic. You have to have, you know, not only the plexiglass in front of the stage, but anyone blowing on an instrument has to have their own plexiglass container on the stage. There can only be like maybe a few people in the audience. And I'm thinking, okay, that means that we're having to turn to the internet for connection. The internet is not always conducive to connection. And I thought to myself the other day, you know, if only like we go to these live performances for a kind of like, for lack of a better word, and I don't mean to be particularly connected to any particular faith or religiosity, but I do think it is a spiritual and human connection that we strive for when we go to concerts. We feel each other. We see a performer who is giving energy. We return the energy back to the performer. There's so much energetic work going on there. And I thought maybe it's like something about the future has to do with the intention and aim of health practitioners and spiritual health practitioners coupled with creation. And there you are. And then when you tell me like your two fortes has been music and spiritual concerns through astrological, tarot, various, you're working within that realm. And it's so interesting to me that you're actually doing the combo of the two, which seems very like they'd be good partners.
I mean, I totally agree, obviously, but I'm a little biased there. I think that in previous time periods and also in places that are not kind of like a colonizer-centered North America, art and healing were not necessarily separate things. And I see them as very integral to one another. And if we think about music, like what is music? It's sound. And sound has for centuries and centuries been used in different methods of healing and as well as bringing people together, which is like its own kind of healing. Like we know that human beings don't do well in isolation. No matter how introverted or extroverted a person is, we know that people need some level of connection and a sense of belonging in order to thrive in their lives. So I see music as kind of healing on that scale of being able to bring a sense of belonging and a sense of connection. Earlier, you were mentioning that, you know, I started going to shows as a teenager here in Toronto. And I think all the time about how fortunate I am to have grown up in Toronto, where there was DIY shows and all ages shows, and for like total weirdos like me who like I've never felt that I belonged in a kind of more mainstream culture. And I think that most of the people in the DIY music scenes within Toronto feel that way as well. So there's that sense of belonging that can be healing in and of itself. But I also think that artists, most of the time, whether or not this is their intention or part of their conscious pursuit with their art, that artists are healers, and that there's an inherent kind of care that art brings to individuals as well as groups of people, that allows us to find meaning in our lives, to put our most difficult experiences of suffering into context, to feel that we're not alone in those experiences, and to also feel that something beautiful and a sense of hope can come out of that as well. And that, to me, is what the healing arts is. It's something that offers us meaning, hope in the most difficult of times, and also the possibility of transformation, that no matter how profoundly difficult someone's life experience has been, that there can and will be windows of opportunity that allow us to move through that. And of course, all of that is mitigated by our socioeconomic circumstances as well. But we each experience opportunities of opening and the possibility of change, no matter how much life is throwing our way.
Yeah, it's inevitable. We never are really inert.
Yes, yeah. And it's something that I try to remind myself all the time. Change is the only constant. And so I think of both the healing arts and the arts themselves as things that remind us of that and help us kind of align with that change, rather than remaining stagnant in things that are often very difficult to be in.
Well, thank you very much for building Venus Fest and doing it so well, with great
My
intention
pleasure.
and excellent art making, and good teamwork.
Thank you,
I hope
Sook-Yin.
that other places will look to the Venus Fest and see how a new model can be conducted.
Thank you, Sook-Yin.
I know you have a lot of work to do. You got a festival to run, so thank you so much, Aerin, for inviting me to be a part this year.
Thank you for being with us.